All right, welcome back to another solo episode of Dark Hours Bright Futures. I'm your host,
And I'm your host, Dylan.
and today we're going to talk about loneliness, something that everybody experiences, right? Um, you know, at one point or another in your life, you're going to experience loneliness, whether it be when you're chasing your goals, if one of your friends leaves you, or you lose a loved one, you're going to deal with loneliness. So we wanted to talk about it today. Um, just, do you have any thoughts about loneliness starting off, Dylan?
Yeah, I think before I provide my thoughts, I think the inspiration for this episode kind of started yesterday. Obviously, so Om and I, for our guest episode, we interviewed one of my best friends. His name's Sam, and I had a call with Sam yesterday, and I kind of just called him, as a friend, saying, sometimes you just want to talk to friends to kind of cheer you up when you're going through a tough time, right? Or I guess any low point you're going through in your life. And I was kind of talking to him about loneliness, and I asked him, have you ever felt loneliness in your life before? And, of course, he answered it honestly, saying, of course I have. I mean, every human being has gone through some form of loneliness one way or another, as Ohm has mentioned. And that's the inspiration for that conversation yesterday, is the inspiration for this episode. I brought up a topic of loneliness for today's episode to Ohm. And, that's how we choose our topics, is, we just kind of freeball it. And how we also pick topics that kind of connect and correlate to where we are at in our lives right now and what we're going through in our own lives. And I feel like this is a perfect topic to talk about, especially as, young 20 year olds. Well, I'm turning 20 tomorrow, but almost already 20, but just young individuals in general today, let's say. So, but as for my thoughts on loneliness, to answer your question, I think loneliness is it's a very tricky thing, huh? I mean, it's one of those things that,
Mm-hmm.
it's a very tricky thing. You just can't explain it. It's one of those things where, you can be surrounded by so many people and be in a room with so many people, yet you still feel alone,
Oh,
right? It's a very weird thing. Loneliness tricks you into thinking that you're the only one that is going through whatever it is you're going through, when in reality you're not. I mean, I think I mentioned this in the last podcast episode, the last solo podcast, but I've definitely mentioned it in one of the guest podcast episodes where, there are over 8 billion people on this planet. And for you to think that you're the only one who's going through what it is you're going through, um, probability wise and statistically, that's impossible. The chances of that are very low, depending on if you're going through a very extreme or rare circumstance. But most of the time, you're not alone, and it's a very tricky thing about loneliness. So, how do I feel about loneliness as a whole? I feel like um, it's a very, very real thing, and our generation, specifically Gen Z and millennials, I think are going through heavy cases of it. I mean, there's like been a recent trend of like these unfiltered content videos
mm-hmm.
online of,
Yep.
I'm X amount of years old and I feel loneliness, or how does it feel to go through loneliness as a 20-year-old, or I feel lonely at 20 years old, I have no friends at 20 years old. And there's been a recent trend of those kind of videos nowadays, and it's very sad, scary, and alarming. So, we're here to provide our 2 cents on that, and hopefully, we can provide some clarity to a lot of people through our personal experiences of going through it. And, I mean, as we'll dive deep into the episode, both Om and I are going through some form of it right now currently. I mean, I don't think
Mm-hmm.
it really ever goes away most of the time, maybe. I don't know. We'll see. But yeah, what do you think, Om?
Number one, I think loneliness is an essential part of life. I think it's a part of the human experience. Everyone's going to experience it at one point or another. Loneliness. It's you hear it time and time again, but it feels, and you reflect on it time and time again, but every time it just feels different, and it's really hard to cope with it sometimes. But yeah, loneliness, you do find yourself, and I've been experiencing loneliness in many forms recently. And so when Dylan brought up the idea, I definitely wanted to talk about it. Just everything from having nobody to talk to in times of, I have Dylan, but a lot of the times your relationships, they're not on a personal level, and that's the goal of this podcast, right? We're trying to build more personal relationships. but a lot of the time, most of the people you come across, they'll never know what you're going through at all, and you won't know what they're going through. And um, treating people like treating people in the worst way, you never know where that's gonna how that affects them, because you don't know what they're going through. Um, some people, even just waking up alone, that's hard for them, especially if they got out of a relationship. Um, driving yourself to school, obviously, like you have to balance being independent and being lonely, but like even Dylan and I, we don't know fully what each other's lives look like every second of the day. So um, I think there's a beauty in it too, because you get, if you do find out about what they go through and what they are experiencing, you can, if you're like that, if you like talking about it and like forming that personal conversation or personal connection, you guys can definitely talk about it and bond. But yeah, like I said, I think it's a very essential part of life, and you find yourself, you wouldn't be the same without it, 100%.
Yeah, I agree with you. Um, I agree with you when you said that loneliness is an essential part of life. I think that it's almost a rite of passage. I think
Mm-hmm.
every
100%.
every human being has to go through loneliness to understand what it's like, but also to, I mean, for character growth, right? I mean, I think
Mm-hmm.
specifically, for us, I'm only going to talk for us and the individuals of our age. I think it's like, as I mentioned earlier, it's very common for individuals our age to feel this sense of loneliness in growing up, the sense of growing up and the uncertainty of what life can or cannot throw at me. And, you know, um, 2 years from now, will this person still be my friend, or will I still have this person in my life, or will my dreams be accomplished, or will I even have a job? Will I even have a house? Will I even have a place to sleep in? Will I even have a car to drive? Right? I mean, these are so many things that can make you feel alone. And that's the thing about loneliness, like I mentioned earlier, is that it's a very dangerous thing because it tricks you into thinking that you're actually alone when in reality you're not. There's other people out there who know exactly what it is you're going through, despite what you may think. And in my own personal experience, what I found is that when I choose to be vulnerable with other people, and I know it's very difficult. Vulnerability is a very difficult thing nowadays for people to open up, right? Very, very difficult. But what I've found out, interestingly enough, is that you'd be surprised by how many people can relate to you if you choose to be vulnerable. Like what Ohm and I have found in our podcast conversations with the guests that we bring on, um, is that we're all just going through the human experience in different ways, but they all kind of overlap in some way, shape, or form. And I think we as human beings, we're all more alike than we are different. As I mentioned earlier in the last podcast, the solo podcast, I mentioned that death is the greatest equalizer of all, and I think that that in of itself makes us more alike than anything. And what I found is that when I talk to my dad about loneliness, my sister about loneliness, my mom about loneliness, I mean, everybody goes through loneliness. We all cope with it in different ways. Some people have, let's say, they're stronger emotionally and they're more well equipped to deal with it, while some others struggle with it, deeply and significantly and extensively. But at the end of the day, we all go through loneliness, and I think that it's a rite of passage that I don't think one can avoid. Honestly, I don't think one can avoid. I have yet to come across an individual who has not gone through a phase of loneliness in their life, and I don't think I ever will come across an individual
Mm-hmm.
who has not ever felt lonely in their life. But it's a rite of passage, and if you choose to kind of ride it out and embrace it and kind of embrace the emotional discomfort, what you find out is that you come out on the other side stronger, more mentally resilient, and kind of more in tune with yourself, right? I think for me, how I'm dealing with loneliness, this kind of ties in with one of the topics of this episode, is how do Ohm and I cope with loneliness? So I'll just answer it right now for me personally, and then Ohm can answer afterwards. I I cope with it by recognizing that this is a time for me to, because I'm alone, because I don't have, well, I mean, it's loneliness can be broken down in two ways, right? Being surrounded by many people, but still feeling alone, or just being alone as a whole with nobody else around you, right? But for me, in my case right now, I kind of fall in those two categories in a way where I'm alone physically, but I'm also alone in the sense where when am surrounded by other people, I feel like nobody else can understand me, and maybe that's just a me problem. But how I cope with it is I use the time to, like I always tell Ohm, to look into your passions. Really get to know yourself. Journaling, reading, meditation, and uh, reflection. And for me, praying. I'm a man of God, like I mentioned. I'm not perfect, definitely not perfect, but I use these things to cope with loneliness, and it's been working. And but I understand that it takes people some time to kind of understand the loneliness they're going through, because you when someone first goes through loneliness, you can't just tell them right off the bat, go read, go meditate, go journal, right? I mean, it's kind of overwhelming. They don't want to hear those things. They want to hear, you know words of reassurance and comfort, like, listen, you're not alone, right? And I think that society nowadays, I mean, there's been a recent trend of videos where loneliness is rising more than ever. So that's how I cope with it. And it's when I first was going through it, it was very difficult, but I'm in a good place now. I mean, loneliness has look where it's taken me now. I'm starting a podcast with Ohm, right? Using this time to really pour this emotional turmoil, let's say, into a creative project, into a creative endeavor with Ohm that could turn out to be something special. So yeah.
I really think like the way you view it is it matters a lot. If you look at your loneliness, you sit back, look at your loneliness, and analyze the positives. Like Dylan said, we're alone, but we have more time to dedicate to our passions. Uh, we journal, find out more about ourselves. It'll help us in the long run. But yeah, to cope with loneliness, I mean, luckily, I have a support system. Dylan, my sister, my family, luckily, and I talk to them about what I'm going through, and I also circling back to the idea of rite of passage, realizing that everybody goes through it. And so like everybody for example, everybody goes through that feeling when they graduate high school. If you when you guys graduate high school, or if you when you graduate high school, either or, you're gonna feel lonely once you are in your car driving home. You just received your diploma, realizing that everybody's gonna go. um, if you ever move, you probably experience it. But there's so many people, literally I think every human that goes to high school like experiences that at some point or in their life, even if they don't feel it in the moment. Later on they'll be like, wow, I'll never see any of those people ever again. But it's a rite of passage. Everyone's gonna feel lonely in one way, shape, or form. So I think realizing that, it definitely, and talking about it with my friends, reflecting on good moments, I think that's definitely how I cope with loneliness. But there's some times where it does get to me, not gonna lie. Um, and sometimes coping, you know, sometimes it's kind of hard to uh, focus on the positives. I understand that, but sometimes you just gotta, sometimes you just gotta deal with it. But yeah, you gotta also make an effort to help yourself and realize that it's all for a cause. Um, I'm a firm believer that everything has a reason. So if you're feeling lonely, you're getting stronger in the process. So yeah,
What I realized too when you said that you have a strong support system, I realized that two things. The first thing being that it makes me really sad, actually, that a lot of people aren't fortunate enough to have a support system out there,
yeah,
to have a friend they can call, um, just mature friends around them that can
that's
have
true.
vulnerable and deep conversations like this. I think that for me, like I've mentioned, and I'm going to keep on mentioning it many times, I'm very blessed to have a friend like you, and have a friend like Sam, and have my family there with me, and God. Most people don't have a strong support system, and I think that that is so crucial in life. Is like, we could sit here and talk about how positive it is to go through loneliness because it puts you in the position to find out who you really are, your passions, right? It teaches you how to be alone, to
Mhm,
love yourself in the process. But at the end of the day, though, we are human beings. We're social creatures. Like we need
mhm,
social interaction in some way, shape, or form to thrive. No matter how introverted you are, nobody can deny that social interaction is an integral part of the human experience.
mhm.
So that's the first thing I want to address. Is just I thinking about that. It's very sad
Yeah.
that most people don't have a support system, and I think that's the first thing I would encourage. Is I know you probably hear it time and time again. If you feel lonely out there and you don't have any friends, which if you sadly enough, that's a lot of people nowadays. It's the case for a lot of individuals. I would say, man, it's cliche, right? Because you hear it time and time again, but put yourself in social gatherings purposefully, no matter how uncomfortable it is. Go to that club, go to that community service event, go to that organization on campus, or just go to a club in general, right? Not a club like a nightclub or whatever. It's your life, but I mean like a club as in like uh, a book club, or go to the gym,
Yeah.
go to like a class in any way, just do something, go out and just be surrounded by other people. And just I know it's easier said than done, but sometimes random strangers would really appreciate for you to strike up a conversation with them. Some people are just yearning for a conversation with a stranger. Connection is I think what most people yearn for nowadays. Seriously, I'm not joking with you. I think what I've learned in this whole podcasting process with Ohm, and I know Ohm can agree with me on this too, is that we've learned that most people from the guests we've interviewed yearn for connection. They yearn to be asked questions about their lives. They yearn for vulnerability and those intimate conversations, right? And I know that that may not always seem the case because we see people on the street and they may have a very a tough exterior, but if you figure out a way to kind of just approach them genuinely, at school or in a coffee shop or wherever, you'll be surprised. It may not work the first couple of times, it may not work all the time, but you'll be surprised by when the times that it does work. You'd be surprised at how well it works. I would say. But the second thing too is the thing is um it's a very difficult thing is to speak about loneliness, right? I mean, I there's this quote from Robin Williams. You know who Robin Williams is, right?
Mhm,
He has a quote that explains loneliness very well. He said that growing up, I think, forgive me if I butcher it. He said something along the lines of, growing up, I thought that the worst thing that could ever happen to me is to be alone. But then I figured out that the worst thing is actually being around people who make you feel alone.
mhm.
So my question to you,
Right.
Om, is do you, judging by your reaction, you obviously find some resonance with that quote.
Yeah,
Is there a
yeah.
particular moment in your life where you don't have to like explain who that individual was or who those individuals were that made you feel
Mhm.
alone, obviously, but was there, can you recall times or experiences where, that did happen to you, where you were surrounded by people who made you feel alone and how it affected you?
Actually, funny enough, if you guys watch my next unfiltered video, I think we created a backlog of content, so it's kind of hard to track which ones we uploaded at this point in time. By the time you see this video, um, but it should be up by the time you see this or hear this. Uh, it's called "I Wish You Were Here" or something along those lines. I don't know what I'm going to title the video yet, but I talk about my experiences growing up and not feeling safe in school. Um, I had a friend group. Okay, well, if we even call them a friend group, I had a group of people that I would hang out with, and unfortunately didn't have anyone else to hang out with, and I already knew them, so naturally I would gravitate towards them. And when it's I couldn't just leave because since I integrated myself into that group, they would come looking for me basically. So I couldn't really separate myself. And even in high school, this happened, not like to this extent, but I had school friends, and I know a lot of you guys probably have school friends, and I know that at school they're good, but you know, they weren't my friends outside of school, and especially in middle school, they treated me horribly. Like sometimes they would treat me good, sometimes they wouldn't, and you could just be at a lunch table, like imagine like a middle schooler, like who doesn't can't stand up for himself, who is scared of whether he's gonna cry in the next 30 minutes, basically. Like just sitting at a table around people that obviously your lunch table is supposed to be your friends, right? But um just not knowing if you're like cared about in that moment, because obviously you want to feel cared for in most of the moments you have in this life. So yeah, I just felt alone because I'm like, are these people really my friends? But I couldn't leave. So that was definitely one time. And yeah, like I said, in high school, I would have friends who were on and off. Sometimes they would treat me really well, but then around in a group setting, I remember one time, to bring up a story. I know, like I've already, in that unfiltered video, I already cried basically. So I've already put everything out there on the internet basically. But like I remember we were talking. I wasn't the best at basketball in high school. I was on the bench, so we were on the track, and it was after a run, and we were, everyone is nice to me individually, but when they're in the group setting, they just gang up on me and like make jokes about how I'm bad at basketball, and just I can't just leave because then everyone would call me a scaredy cat, whatever. So my advice, out of everything I just said, is that, like Dylan said, put yourself out there. Um, it might be hard to approach individuals because you're thinking about, oh, what are they gonna think? Maybe they just don't want to talk, especially with people with earphones in all the time. I'd be scared. Like sometimes I'd just be like, should I even approach them? Maybe they don't want to talk, but like I said, a lot of these, or like Dylan said, a lot of these people do yearn for that conversation, because like typically when I have a conversation, especially with people like Sudhir, which you guys will know soon, um, we just have deep conversations that people don't get that often. So go up to people, compliment them. I'm sure they're yearning for. I'm sure they would love a compliment, and you'll make friends that way. And you just want to be around people who you feel like care for you, um, and you want to be in settings that you feel like you belong. So try not to put yourself in that many situations where you don't feel like you would belong. Like personally, I'm sorry I'm rambling on, but I one time I went to a house party, and if anyone knows me, like I'm not a partier at all, but and I don't denounce anything for partying, but um I was just in the corner the whole time, and people always roast that person in the corner, right? But I just felt alone because no one's I just didn't have to be there. So yeah, those were definitely some times that I felt alone, um, even though I was surrounded by people.
Yeah, I mean, um, forgive me if anybody heard that. I literally just burped by accident. My bad, guys. But I, uh, I, uh, I find some resonance with your story. Well, first of all, I appreciate your vulnerability because one of the things I love about doing these solo episodes, right, is because I feel like I get to know new things about you that I didn't know before, even though we're very close friends, right? It gives me an opportunity to know things about you that I didn't know before. So anytime you reveal something new to me, there's a there's a connection there being formed, new formed connection. But a time A time for when I felt alone, being surrounded by other people. You know, I mean, I had because Owen and I went to the same high school, right? He's probably going to know who I'm talking about when I bring up the type of people that I was surrounded with. I'm also not going to name them or out them like that. But you know, obviously, I played basketball with Owen, right? And you know, there were some individuals who you surround yourself with, and then you start to question why am I choosing to surround myself with these people? What I've noticed too, the thing about loneliness, right, is that people would rather surround themselves. The individuals who are lonely are so scared of lonely that they would that they would prefer to surround themselves with terrible people just to stop them from being lonely. Have you noticed that? They're so scared of being
Mhm.
lonely that they choose to surround themselves with terrible people.
That's true.
That's what I've noticed.
It's a hard
And it's
thing.
actually
Yeah.
really, really sad. It's really terrible. And you know, you ask these people like, if he's so terrible, why do you if he or she is so terrible, if they are so terrible, why do you choose to still be with them or surround yourself with them? And they just don't want to be alone. They don't want to be alone sometimes, or due to any other reasons or any other explanations, right? And it's a terrible thing. But like I mentioned earlier, I played basketball with Ohm, and you know, it's there were times when I felt lonely in high school, you know, finding my place, you know, what I wanted to do in high school, you know, there were times, many times actually, where I caught myself doing things just to fit in, just to fit in, just to be liked. You know, the way I dressed, the way I acted, the people that I hung out with. I'm ashamed to admit it now, right? But I'm just being honest, right? And I feel like a lot of high schoolers, a lot of young not only high schoolers, just a lot of young individuals nowadays in general, right? Commit actions they didn't want to commit in the first place just for the sake of fitting in. And to me, there's nothing more lonely than being someone who you are not. Portraying this avatar, this character, right? This facade, being another person, being this other character that deep down you know you are not. And it's lonely because you start to lose a sense of who you are, your roots, your values, your moral compass. And anytime you lose touch with those things, life becomes dark. You just don't know who you are. And I know for a fact that, you know, when I was in high school, there are many times where I caught myself doing those things. And I made a promise to myself when I graduated high school that, you know, or actually improved during senior year, actually. I made a promise to myself during senior year, but mostly after high school that I would starting moving forward, I would become more of who I'm meant to be myself, essentially, as cliche and corny as that may sound, because you always hear it time and time again. But that is how I genuinely felt, and you know, yeah, I well, this is like it's pretty evident that you know, Owen and I are going through tough times now, personally with both of our parents, and you know, school and a lot of things. But as I mentioned earlier, I look at this time as a way for me to really test my resolve, see what I'm made of with this podcast, you know, and it presents a very beneficial opportunity for me to test my limits in a way, you know. So
Mhm.
that's the way I see it. But
Mhm.
yeah, currently right now, I mean, you don't have to go into full details, obviously, because you know we still want to remain, still uh, keep our anonymity in some way, shape, or form. But um, any form of loneliness that you're currently going through right now in your life.
Yeah. Um, in fact, I mean, I want to say right now, but obviously because you're
Hmm.
here, but um, I think almost every day, to be honest, like, number one, I miss my family. If you guys notice, I'm in two different settings all the time. That's because I travel between home and school, but I have a luckily, I have a tight knit relationship with my family, and I miss them. That's number one. Number two, there's a lot of things I have to do that people don't know. um, just to name a few, like on top of this podcast, I have to apply for internships, do side projects for my major. I run two clubs. I I have a lot of obligations on my plate, and you know, when people ask like, "Oh, why can't you hang out?" or "Why can't you like?" They ask me, "Oh, is this time fine?" Right? Like, but I have a lot of things on my plate, and it's kind of hard to communicate that because people don't understand really. Um, so I feel that loneliness. I also feel like in terms of college, this goes out to the college audience if you guys are there, but moving off campus after the dorming with your people, if you have this goes if you have like a close knit relationship with your friends from college, but this is the first year that I don't live with my friends, and I'm gonna circle back to this point later, so I'll skip it for now. But I used to just go to um, the door neck. Like we lived in the same building, so I would just whenever I was bored, I would just walk over. And not having that anymore, not knowing, I used to know what they're doing most of the time, but now it's just like I see these people every week, every 2 weeks, sometimes even three. Um, and I just don't know what's going on in their lives anymore, and it's definitely lonely. Just most of the day, a lot of the time I don't talk to anybody, so I feel like those are the main sources of loneliness. But I do know it's for a reason, and the point I wanted to circle back to is that I know a lot of people, especially, I'm not gonna say especially, but I know a lot of people who like loneliness is the main root for their addictions, their tendencies. So if you really sit, because I know, yeah, I know a lot of people who truly don't want to do that stuff, and just because they want to fit in, based on the fact that they don't want to feel lonely, or yeah, they don't want to feel lonely, they do things that turn them into an avatar, someone that they're not supposed to be. And I felt like when I was in college and I was going to my friends every second of the day, I was numbing and trying to be around people, which I do love them, so it was fun to be around them. I was kind of numbing the fact that one, I was homesick, or two, like I was just hiding feelings at the time. Whatever I was going through, I went through a lot in the last 2 years. So I try to numb problems without accurately in depth, like going in depth and reflecting. So I feel like it's always valuable to reflect and evaluate, constantly reevaluate. And I feel like if you do a deep dive into what you're feeling, if you have that problem where you numb yourself with other things, you'll make progress and make it go away.
Loneliness is okay, so I mean, part of the reason why Owen and I started this podcast, and especially these solo episodes to talk about, just document the human experience, our human experiences, and what we're going through in our own personal lives with self improvement and whatnot, and how the moves we're making in our lives essentially. And I talk about this all the time with Owen. I kind of want to talk about it, bring this conversation up to light. With this solo episode, I say to Owen all the time that self improvement is on the outside, it looks glamorous, right? Because you see all the results, the possible results you can achieve. You know, um, the dream physique. In better physical shape. Mentally stronger and whatnot. More knowledgeable, reading books, and you just feel more confident, right? With self improvement, all those self improvement routines. But at the root of it all, I told Om, self improvement is pretty lonely. It can be lonely sometimes, right? I mean, like how often are you going to come across individuals who are like-minded like you, who want to become the best versions of themselves possible, right? Most people, I'm just going to be honest, like, I'm not trying to bash anybody here, right? Despite what you may think from what I'm about to say, I'm not trying to bash anybody here, but most people nowadays are willing to settle for less. They don't want to test their limits. They don't want to break their limits. They don't want to become the best versions of themselves possible. And it's easier said than done, right? I mean, you hear it all the time on YouTube and on social media from these motivational shorts and these motivational creators. Become the best version of yourself possible. The best version of yourself possible is who you should strive to be each and every single day of life you're given. But we all know that's easier said than done, right? It's a very uncomfortable and lonely process because what's lonely about it is it requires a lot of honesty, internal reflection, being honest with yourself, looking at yourself in the mirror every single day and calling yourself out on your BS and on your flaws, acknowledging that you're not perfect and that you're never going to be perfect, but that's a part of life. And life is uncomfortable. I mean, growing up, right? I'm turning 20 tomorrow, and for the past 2 years since I graduated high school, the truth that life is tough and difficult has never been more present in my mind. Like, life is tough, man. And for me to realize at a young age, I can't imagine how life is only going to get tougher down the line. Hopefully not too tough to the point where I can't handle it. But, like Ohm said, all of this is a test, right? To see what my resolve is, what my how resilient I am, how strong I am mentally. And, self-improvement is lonely. And, also I tell Ohm this all the time too, is being the bigger person, being a good person nowadays is tough. It's also very lonely as well. Being a person of morals and of values is very lonely nowadays. It's very lonely. Because let's be honest, right? How many people, everybody has some form of values in some way, but how many people actually stick up for their values and protect their values regardless of the backlash they face? Most people don't. Most people just display, you know, they change, they switch up very instantly in the face of adversity, in the face of public backlash or whatever it may be, right? They switch up instantly. They throw all those values out the window. But for me and Ohm, the type of individuals that we strive to be are individuals of honesty, of mental fortitude, of 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 individuals who plant their feet firm in the ground. And for anybody who saw Captain America: Civil War, Captain America's got some very insightful lines. He says that when the world, I don't even know how it goes, when the world pushes you, whatever, it's your job to plant your feet in the ground and stand firm and to uphold your beliefs and your values no matter what, because you also, I feel like, have a moral obligation to do those things as a human being, right? I think we have a moral obligation as human beings to tell the truth. And that is the standard to which Ohm and I hold ourselves to be for all of our podcast episodes that we do. It's tough sometimes. It's tough because we wonder what kind of backlash we're going to face for these kind of episodes, like what of the things we say. But at the end of the day, though, we both recognize that as human beings, we have a moral obligation to speak our mind and to speak the truth. Even if you don't agree with what Ohm and I have to say, the greatest gift that we can give to you is something to think about, right? And then from that, you choose how you want to move on with your life. Ohm and I both know we're not naive and arrogant enough to think that every person who comes across our podcast, whether it be the guests that we interview or the viewers who watch our episodes, are going to agree with us. That'd be pretty naive of us to think. We both acknowledge that. We've acknowledged that many times. So, I mean, I guess on how this all kind of correlates with loneliness is another quote that I heard. So many quotes, so many great quotes. Is I tell them this all the time as well. Is you know, what's popular is not always right, and what's right is not always popular. You may find yourself being the odd one out of the group. A sheep, the only sheep in a pack of wolves, or whatever, however analogy you see fit in the situation, right? But as I mentioned earlier, right, all that matters at the end of the day is doing what's right. And it's tough being a good person nowadays. It's lonely because everywhere we go, you see temptation on college campuses to smoke, to drink, to go to school on the weekdays and go party on the weekends and just repeat the same process over and over again, right? And at a certain point, you start to wonder, is my life really just about the the cycle of school and partying, or is there more to my life, right? And when you really start to take your life seriously and to get your act together, I'm telling you guys right now, as a 20-year-old, it's it's gonna get lonely when you get your act together in life. It's gonna get lonely because you are gonna have to let some people go. You're gonna have to let some old habits go. But above all of that, you got to let go of your old identity, the identity that identified with all those previous habits or those bad people who used to associate yourself with, those people who distracted you from really deciding on what your true mission and purpose is in life. And that's all that matters at the end of the day. So, life is a journey and you're going to feel lonely, right? And uh, loneliness it's a rite of passage in life, and embrace it. Embrace it because I'm telling you guys right now, right? Some beautiful things can come from times of negativity. Look what Owen and I are doing right now, starting this podcast. We're having a vulnerable conversation. And from this conversation, we're learning things about each other that we didn't know before. And from that, we're forming a deeper connection as friends. So never be afraid of loneliness because some of the most beautiful things can come from times of negativity. And we see this with artists all the time, right? The most successful artists in the world, sometimes they make their best works of art from times of loneliness and times of negativity and times of despair, right? So essentially what I'm trying to say is don't shy away from the struggle of loneliness, because you'd be surprised at what you can learn about yourself in this time of loneliness, and what you can learn about human nature. And if you really take the time to focus on yourself, you'd be surprised at how much more there is to life than you thought before. Essentially is what I'm trying to say. um yeah. It's a lot to say, huh? It's a
That's a lot
lot.
to yeah, it's a lot to that's a
Yeah, it's
lot,
a
man.
lot. Yeah, it's a lot.
Um,
And yeah,
it goes back to the idea of numbing.
yeah.
Once you sit back, I think one I keep saying this time and time again. Our main goal is to talk to you guys, and we want you guys to filter what we say, right?
Mhm.
Um, and apply it to your own life. And you also have to apply that filtering to a lot of the things you do. If you party, if you do all these things, ask yourself why you party. If you can't come up with a valid answer, you got to dissect it. You got to you got to you can always go deeper, ask why. And in doing that, you're going to find out more about yourself, and you're going to find out your flaws. You're going to find out what you need to get together. And at the end of the day, you don't want to be on your deathbed regretting, man, I should have tried harder. I should have done the best I can. I could have. I should have done. I should have lived up to my potential. And when you sit back, dissect everything, you're going to find out your flaws. And your main mission should be, number one, being of service to the people around you, making everybody's lives better. But to do that, you need to find your purpose, and you need to find how you're going to make your mark in this world. And
Usually
it's going to be lonely.
oh, yeah,
Just going to say it's going to be lonely, but it's all for a reason.
yeah, and it's worth it in the end too.
It's
Worth it.
100% worth
It may
it.
not seem like
Yep.
it in the moment, but when you look back, it's definitely worth it. Usually we end the
Mm-hmm.
podcast around this time mark, but I wanted to say one more thing because we're getting into some juicy stuff. But Ohm brought up a good point about how numbing, how numbing your emotions ties in with loneliness, right? So the first thing that I want to address what Ohm said that he brought up a very good point about is people rarely nowadays, and I know you for sure can agree with me on this because we talk about it all the time, right? But it's really rare to come across an individual nowadays who really reflects on everything that they do. And what I mean by that is reflecting in a healthy manner. Like
Mhm.
most people nowadays don't question or reflect on every decision that they make. People just act out of just
Habit,
impulse,
impulse.
compulsion. Most people don't question why they do the things they do. Like, why do you go to that party when you know you don't even want to go to that party in the first place? Right? Like, why are you doing things you know you don't want to do, but you still do it? So, how this ties with loneliness is from my own personal experience, right? What I found is that I keep doing the things. How am I trying to say? Hold on. Let me figure out how I'm trying to say this right now. Hold on. It's a
What is
lot,
it?
dude. It's a lot because you brought up a good point. You brought up a very good point. It's a lot.
See, this is how normal conversations go.
Yeah, yeah. This is how normal. Yeah, exactly. None of this is scripted, bro. We have no script.
Yeah.
Um, what I found is that people are the people that I've come across at least. They're lonely because they can't sit in a room by themselves with their own thoughts. They can't turn off the technology. They can't turn off the phone. They can't just sit in a room with their own thoughts and just sit in silence with their own thoughts. They can't even look at themselves in the mirror without any distractions. Just take a good, honest look at themselves. Honestly, I'm telling you the truth, right? I think most people nowadays fear themselves. They fear their flaws, they fear their insecurities. And what most people don't realize is that by shying away from your flaws and your insecurities, it's actually the thing that's holding you back from transcending into that next level of your life. And listen, I'm not saying anything new here. Ohm and I aren't saying anything new with these podcast episodes that we put out. All we are just messengers, right? Because if we can be an extra added voice to these positive messages, that's all that matters. It's just about spreading the positive message. That's all that matters, right? And what I found is that loneliness, right, generally, generally stems is loneliness typically stems from people who are out of touch and out of tune with themselves. That's what I found, generally speaking, from the people that I talk to, the people, my friends that I've had in the past, from talking to you. Loneliness typically is derived from not being who you are and being out of tune with yourself per se. That's what I found. That's what I found out loneliness is. Um, that's what I wanted to say. So for last closing message from me is, though, for those of you right who feel lonely, like when I mentioned, just put yourself out there. I know it's hard. Put yourself out there. Talk to as many people as possible, even if those conversations or those connections don't last for the long term. At least you put yourself out there and you put yourself in an uncomfortable position, and you can take satisfaction, fulfillment from that, knowing that you did something that most people are scared to do. And number two, what you can kind of emulate what Omen and I are doing right now by not starting a podcast per se, but pouring these feelings, right, into a creative project in some way, right? Figure out a way to be of service to other people in your times of suffering. And what I found personally too from that is that in when I've suffered in my own life in terms of going through some emotional problems or whatever, what I found is that when I chose to stop focusing on myself and putting the focus on others by being of service to others and helping other people out through my form of suffering, what I found is that that's actually it helped out a lot. For me, doing this podcast with Ohm, venting about our feelings towards life, talking to people, connecting with people, that's my form of getting through the situations I go through in life. That's my form of 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 coping and working my way through it. But for you, it may be journaling, it may be writing a book, it may be exercising, it may be making YouTube videos motivating people. It could be just create something. Create something, focus on something outside of yourself. You might be asking, well, if I'm going through something negative, why wouldn't I focus on myself to try to mitigate the suffering or ease the suffering? And ironically, I think what I found is that those things happen naturally when you choose to focus on something that's greater than you and outside of yourself. When you devote yourself to a higher cause, that's what I found actually mitigates the suffering and eases the suffering. And lastly, what I wanted to say is this: put away the phone. Put away the phone. Just put the phone down. I know this is rich coming from a guy who's starting a podcast with his best friend who's on social media and who makes shorts and posts shorts on Instagram and all these social media platforms. I know that's rich coming from us. But I'm telling this right now. Put down the phone, turn off the technology, turn off the TV, turn off the Netflix, turn off the Disney Plus, the HBO Max, turn off the YouTube, right? And just sit in a room and stare at the wall and just really be mindful of your thoughts. What do you want to do? What do you want to do? And the best way I can explain it is this: go on YouTube and search up boredom leads to creativity, boredom leads to greatness, and you'll understand what I'm talking about. Stop being scared of yourself. Look at yourself in the mirror and decide who you want to be in life. Confront those flaws, confront those insecurities, tackle them head on. The best way to tackle or to conquer your quote unquote demons, I don't like to use that word, I think it's corny, but is to, turn around and face them. Stop running away from them. That's all it is. All these self improvement gurus just babble on and on and on about how to control your life, how to become mentally stronger, just babble on and on and on. When I think you already know the answer already, right? Is to turn around and face your demons. Stop running away from them. Stop covering and numbing yourself with the pain with addictions, with social media addiction, constantly scrolling on your feed, checking out who this random person is on the internet and what they're doing with their life. This person doesn't even care about you, doesn't even know you exist. Right? It's a waste of time. Right? So if you truly translated the amount of time that you spent on social media to your own life, to your own personal growth, you'd be surprised at how many things can change for the better. That's what I have to say for my closing thoughts.
I have to agree with everything you said. It's kind of sad, going to school every day on the bus. Everyone's just on their phones, and yeah, I get the vibe, or vibe. I don't like using that word, but I get the impression that they just keep numbing themselves. They're not sitting. I obviously you don't have to reflect 100% of the time. Like I think it would be daunting, right? But um, being focused on having attention, being focused on what you are meant for, and like Dylan said, put yourself out there and just confront everything head on. Reflect on a lot of the reflect on most of the decisions you make, if not all, and you'll be surprised on where you end up.
And listen,
That's all I
just
got for me.
embrace, yeah, and just embrace the human experience, man. You're a human
Mm-hmm.
being, dude. Just embrace the human experience, all right? Stop beating yourself up over just being a human being, going through these negative emotions. You're a human being at the end of the day who has emotions, right? You're supposed to feel something. Now, don't let your emotions stop you from getting the job done, getting the mission done, but embrace everything, right? Try to find a way to let it fuel you, to motivate you, right? So you're a human being, embrace the journey of life. It's a marathon, as they say, not a sprint.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, yep.
But yeah, that's all from us today. We have all the links in the description. Check out our unfiltered videos. We talk more about this stuff, talk about more of our personal experiences, and we hope that you guys extract some value out of all our episodes, all our unfiltered content. Even if you see us on shorts, we hope you guys extract value and make it your mission. Someone else uses it as a quote, but just find yourself and serve others. and you'll find your mission.
I agree.
But yeah, we'll see you guys in the next one.